Hello, everybody. This is Nick Totero, Professor of Information Technologies and Computer Science, Lakeland Community College. All right, let's talk about security. First, let's talk about security in general, and then we're going to bring that over to information security. Security in general has been going on forever since we've been able to understand protecting our property, protecting our persons. Those are all techniques that we've used in the past for thousands of years for security. We can find locks and, if we go back to the ancient castles, moats, putting up walls, those are all some form of a security. And what you're doing with that is you're protecting either protecting your physically or protecting your property. Now, in this class, we're concerned with information protection. Now, with that information protection, or with information, if it is given to the wrong person or it is found out by the wrong person, it can still affect that personal protection or that property protection. But we're going to focus more on the information security side. So let's go to my screen and let's look at one of the core, I guess they would be like a pyramid or discussion, what they call the CIA model. Has nothing to do with the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA model of information security. So let's go up to my screen and you're going to see this type of pyramid, or we can talk about it in detail throughout whatever course you're dealing with, whether it's cybersecurity, forensics, ethical hacking, general IT knowledge. And this is what they call the CIA model. It has nothing to do with the Central Intelligence Agency. Keep reiterating that. And what information security is trying to do is, here's information. And we are trying to protect that. And we'll talk about the different types of information in a bit, but we're trying to protect that information. We don't want it disclosed, or we don't want it captured by somebody else because it has a potential of doing harm. Something as simple as somebody stealing your credit card number has a potential of causing you financial harm. So we need to protect that. And the CIA model is basically confidentiality. We need to find ways to ensure that the information that is being disclosed or the information that is being transported is only available to authorized individuals. Now, usually when we talk about confidentiality, we get into encryption, that when we transmit information between point A and point B, that information is so encrypted that if somebody was to intercept it, it would basically be meaningless. So confidentiality, you're going to hear encryption a lot. And I'll do some demonstrations, some quick demonstrations in this video in a bit. The second one, the CIA, confidentiality, I, is integrity. Making sure that the information is accurate and can only be modified by individuals that have the right to modify that information. For example, you don't want the bad actors getting into your bank account and then withdrawing cash or anything like that. You want that authorization to really only be to individuals that have the ability to do that. And again, I will provide more details in a bit. And finally, we get to the A. Availability. Availability just means that the right individual with the right confidentiality has access to their information at the right time. We are now in a 24/7 world where we need access to our information pretty much around the clock. So we want to make sure that if we want that information, we can get to that information. And there's a lot of things involved with that. Again, that's what this course, other courses will generally discover. So the CIA model, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You're going to hear me repeat those in other videos, or you have other people, if you're talking about any kind of cybersecurity, we'll hear that all the time. Let's talk about information now. And again, before we get into information, we have to jump into a Wayback Machine and look at how things were even up to 20 years ago. 20 years ago, there wasn't this overall concern about information security, because most of us were not directly interacting with that information. If I had a bank account, I physically had to go to the bank. If I wanted a receipt on a transaction, I would physically go to the bank and ask for it, and they would provide me that information. Many people didn't even have computer accounts. There would be people like myself who I had computer accounts, but maybe I wasn't accessing them on the internet. If we go back 30 years ago, the vast majority of people just didn't need access to electronically stored information. Did we have information? Absolutely. Let me bring up another image here. And this is what an example of personally identify information, PII. If I had personal information, for example, a bank account, going back 30 years ago, I'd have a little book, little passbook, they would call it, and I would keep that in a strong box. And many people still keep things inside their strong box. They might keep deeds and titles and bank account statements, investment statements, but those tend to be, almost like an older technology. We have been going into the direction of a paperless society. So when we use the word paperless society, we're basically saying we're taking that information that we used to store on paper and we're moving that to electronically. And now we need to destroy that paper because we don't want records of that. But we may still have the occasional paper document. We may still have the car title. We may have the house title. We may have wills and probate information. And that's still stored inside a physical strongbox. But so much of our information, so much of that stuff that was once on paper is now electronic. They want us to go to this paperless environment, and that's fine. Who are they? Corporations. They don't want to send us credit card statements in the mail. They could be very thick or very thin, but they say we're destroying trees, and I understand that. So they say, okay, we're going to provide that information electronically. You want it by month? You want it by date? You want it by the hour? And we can find out information. Personally, there are times if I purchase something on my phone, I will see that credit card statement almost instantly. That's personal PII information. And there is different types of PII here. For example, they have non-sensitive. Anything that is readily available without any intrusion. For example, your name, your first name, your last name, your license plate. Anybody can basically see that in a car. Zip codes, your height, your weight. Yes, we don't want that information out. But if somebody can look at you and easily get that, that is fine. Usernames, email addresses. Now, with email addresses, those will tend to fluctuate between non-sensitive and sensitive. There's a lot of organizations where the individual have both a sensitive email address that's used for internal uses or a non-sensitive one that can be used for outside. We all do that. I have my Lakeland email address that most people use, and I have a personal email address that I basically use for non-Lakeland things. Now, with sensitive, or what they refer to as direct personally identify information, mother's maiden names. Now we're at the grandmother's maiden names, identification numbers, social security numbers, any kind of credit card numbers, anything that would potentially compromise or do you harm if that was released. Now you might say, how would mother's maiden name potentially do me harm if that was released? Well, we even have to go a little bit further back. For many years, they used to say mother's or maternal grandmother's maiden name. And I remember this as a small child. I was probably 9, 10 years old. I was at the bank with my mom, and she was creating an account. And the banker said, well, what is your mother's maiden name or something? And my mother was a very inquisitive person. She said, why do they always ask that? Because that is personal information that's probably very difficult to discover. If you were to look up me or somebody, it may be very difficult to find a grandmother's maiden name. So that was something that we can easily identify. Social security number, obviously. Now, quick story about social security number. When I was in college in the early 80s, that was our student ID. Our social security number was our student ID. And can you imagine this happening now? I remember being in lecture classes. One was a physics class where there would be 300 people in that physics class. And they would break out into labs and stuff like that. But 300 people, and we would all take the same exam. And then when the instructor would then post our exam grades based upon our social security number, can you imagine 300 social security numbers posted in a hallway, and you'd find your social security number and you'd look at, oh, and that's my grade. And they viewed it as they were protecting your privacy because they weren't putting your name there, and they figure that only you would have access to your social security number. That was in the early 80s. By the 90s, they stopped doing that. For years, Lakeland used to use social security numbers. Then they went to Lakeland ID. Why? Because more and more things are being tied to that social security number. And we'll talk about social security numbers and other ID numbers in other courses or in other videos. But your social security number is tied to so many things. It's not tied to your social security account. It's tied to credit applications, car loans, you name it. Why? Because your social security number is a unique identifier. No two people in the world have the same social security number. Nobody's allowed to have two social security numbers. And then there's other things, biometrics and passwords and places of birth and things that would be very difficult to discover, or more importantly, if they were discovered, they have the potential of doing you harm. Now, I'm going to do something that most of us do all the time, probably on a daily, if not on an hourly basis. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to log into a website, but I'm going to break it down. And I encourage my students to begin to observe and pay attention to things, especially if you're in the cybersecurity world and the IT world. Pay attention to things and begin to just ask yourself questions. Why are they doing that? How is that being done? Is there some other reason that is being done? We as IT providers, we have to know this stuff, right? I talk in other videos, and I'll talk in this video about what we call a provider versus a consumer. An IT consumer is somebody that doesn't have to be aware of this stuff. They are just using the technology, and that is fine. All of us are IT consumers. But the provider has to better understand what is going on and why. And you start that by observation. So here we are at the Lakeland webpage, and I'm going to log in. Now, stop there. Let's go back to our CIA model, availability. I need to do something on private information, my private information at the Lakeland account. Therefore, I have to have availability to this Lakeland account. Now, how can availability be jeopardized? Denial of service attacks. A couple years ago, Lakeland was directly assaulted by a denial of service attack, which meant we couldn't get into our personal information. Now, can you imagine if, and it was very difficult, but even if I keep it simple, if a bank has a denial of service attack, or Amazon.com or eBay has a denial of service attack, I can't buy something on Amazon.com. I can't get something on eBay. So there's one of those legs of our triangle about availability, security, or information security. We have to find methods and improve methods that when somebody wants that information, somebody valid wants that information, they can get that. So I know we're available. Well, so we're going to start off with availability. Now, I'm going to make a giant assumption here, and the assumption I'm going to make in this video and in pretty much all information security is that there is an account made for me, right? Somewhere along the line, an account has been made for me. That gets into integrity, because with integrity, I have to provide confidential information, or information that I have to be able to prove who I am to maintain the integrity of any transaction. So when I connect in, somebody at some point created an account for me at the Lakeland server. So that's going to be another step into our triangle of integrity. I have to be able to prove who I am. Now, before we go any further, here's where we begin to observe things. First of all, this is not Chrome. This browser I'm using is what's called a DuckDuckGo browser. The big thing with the DuckDuckGo browser is the intent to make things more private. So they begin to block things because your personal information has a value to it. Even the readily identifiable personal information, where you're coming from, where is your location, what time you're logging in, anything that's easily tracked, that's personal information that is particularly sold. And DuckDuckGo and Brave are two browsers that are used to mitigate or reduce the amount of personal information that you send over the internet, whether they're blocking ads or restricting cookies or things like that. But if we look at this, so this is the DuckDuckGo browser. I'm at the Lakeland website. You'll notice there's a little shield here, and it's green. That's green is usually a good indication that this is probably a safe site. But before I even go to that, you'll see it says www.lakelandcc.edu. So if I was to click on that, before we go any further, I can look and see that it's HTTPS. Now, generally speaking, a communication between a web browser and a web server is done through either HTTP or HTTPS, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP is unsecure, right? The information is unsecure. The transmission between the browser and the server is unsecure. So most servers know that. Most server developers know that. So they develop a protocol called HTTPS, basically Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, in which the information between my browser and the server is encryption. There's confidentiality. If somebody can intercept or could intercept the traffic between my browser and the server, they're just basically going to get gibberish. So HTTPS, security, that means that the transmission between point A and point B is secure. Now, I'm going to click on this shield for a little bit, just kind of show you some of the things that DuckDuckGo is blocking for your protection of your personal information. First of all, it is telling me that this connection between my browser is encrypted. It even tells me how it's encrypted with the RSA method. It's 2048 bits of encryption. Long discussions about that, but basically it's saying it's using a standard encryption method. Now, how it uses encryption real quickly is there's a third party in this communication between my browser and the server. There's a trusted third party that guarantees to the server and guarantees to me that the two of us are who we say we are. That has to do with certificates and certificate authorities. Talk about that in other videos. All right. What about the other things? This one is just privacy information. This is showing me the things that have been blocked. Now, Google is not a bad entity. It's not a bad actor. But one of the ways that Google and other organizations make money is by adware, by tracking things, by maintaining their own information database, because information is power. It's expensive. It can be sold. So Google routinely sells information about whatever information they give. Now, they're not gathering that private information, but I guarantee you they're gathering, I think, about 40 to 60 data points. The moment you hit Google and you look something up, 40 to 60 data points. They're tracking your IP address. They're tracking what time you're connecting into that Google. They're connecting browsers. There is a whole bunch of things, and they haven't even started. You haven't even started. 40 to 60 data points for every connection to Google. I blocked that a little bit, and that helps reduce all that extra stuff that you might get, spams and things like that. And then finally, it's third-party requested information. Again, Google Ads and Cloudflare, they requested, and they couldn't block that. Maybe there was a reason they couldn't. Obviously, there was a reason they couldn't block that. So anyways, I have a secure connection, and now I am going to log into Lakeland. So availability. The site is available for me. When we had a denial of service attack, it wasn't available to me, right? So availability. An account was already created for me, right? Or I have to create the account immediately the first time I have to log in. That has to deal with pretty much integrity, making sure that anything I do within that account is me, and I'm going to provide it passwords, some kind of protection along that line. And then confidentiality. We think about encryption, that security. So the data between my browser and the server is encrypted. So let me log in. Now, one of the things that all security is based on is this approach of having to log in, having to identify yourself. We're all used to it. We give it a username that tells the system what account to use, and then we provide it some kind of secret, something that will verify who we are. And recently, we have begun to use two-factor authentication, where we're not just giving it the username. The username is generally a public information. It's hard to keep usernames private. Then there's ways that people do, but passwords are private, and two-factor authentication, and you'll see a demonstration in a second, really guarantees that it's me, right? If you use two-factor authentication, there's a high probability that it is you. It's very difficult to break two-factor authentication. Let me demonstrate. First of all, I'm going to put my username. You're all familiar with my username. Lakeland usernames are just basically your email address without the stuff behind the @ sign. And I'm going to give it a password. Now, passwords are a long discussion too. They have to have special characters, special characters, upper and lower case, numbers. And the more difficult we make the password, the better it's able to prove who we are, and the less likely that somebody will guess it. Years ago, passwords were just 8 characters, and they'd say, make it something you can remember. So we had passwords like basketball or a football team or a baseball team or something like that. It doesn't work anymore, right? There are ways that we can breach systems by just guessing passwords. It's called brute force. So here I am dealing with verifying who I am. Integrity. Right? Verifying that when I get in, it's me who is making the changes. I'm not going to save the password. Now we get into the two-factor authentication. Now with the two-factor authentication, I'll hold up my screen real quickly. I use the Google Authenticator app. Lakeland allows us generally a couple ways to do it for that two-factor authentication. One is by sending you an email. The other is by using some kind of authenticator, whether it be the Google Authenticator or the Microsoft Authenticator. I strongly encourage you to use either Google or Microsoft's Authenticator and don't use your email address. Why? Every piece of information you have to give to an account. Let's use Facebook for an example. Great site. I use Facebook all the time. I keep up with friends. I'm not disparaging Facebook. But when you give Facebook your email address, you are also giving them the right to sell your email address, right? So if you're using Facebook's two-pass authentication, you can have them use an email, but you have to give them that email. I choose not to. You can set up Authenticator for Facebook, and that's what I do. So when I have to do two-pass authentication and they give me an option of either using an email address or using some kind of authenticator app, I use the authenticator app so I don't have to give an email. Now with Lakeland, they already have my email, but I like the authenticator app. And what the authenticator app does, discussions at later time, other videos, the authenticator app basically provides a one-time password. I have my password. I have my username, I have my password, it's locked in my head. But a two-factor authentication says, continue to prove it. You have the first pass of your username and password, continue to prove it. And what an authenticator app, they give you a one-time password that probably has a life of about 45 seconds to a minute. So as I look at this authenticator app, I'm seeing these numbers being generated, right? And these numbers only last for 45 seconds to a minute. And if I provide that number, I go here, it's a one-time password. It will never come up again. There's 6-digit numbers, so you do the math. The chances of you hacking into, or a bad actor hacking in using a two-factor authentication, the second is not that much. I can tell you the number I'm looking at was 747075. It's never going to be used again. Or if it is going to be used again, it's going to be so random that, yeah, you can try my password. You still don't give out your core password. That would be a bad thing. A lot of reasons for that. We'll talk about that in other videos. But the two-factor authentication does protect it. So we have our core password, the one we remember, and then a two-factor password. And now we're into Lakeland's account. So did I cover the CIAs to get into this information? I can start looking at my records. I have my pay stubs. I can look at student records. I can look at accounts. There's a lot of private information here. So did it protect it? First of all, was it available? Yes, right? Remember, a couple years ago, we had a denial of service attack. I couldn't even get in here. So somebody had to begin to secure for those denial of service attacks. Is it me? The integrity is yes, because at some point an account was created for me. Fine. And then they set up different permissions of what I can and cannot do within that account. Integrity. And finally, confidentiality, that the information that's going back and forth between my machine and the server is confidentially secured by some kind of encryption method. And we get into RSA and other encryption methods down the road. So this is just a beginning. This is just an intro. As we dive deeper into security, each one of those things come into play, and we talk about them in grand detail. For example, availability, a lot of protection to keep those websites up, a lot of protection to keep any of those servers up, denial of service attacks, malicious attacks, things like that. Integrity, we get into password strings, usernames, what a user can and cannot do once they're inside the system. That's good. Imagine this. Integrities might have policies. You go to a bank's ATM machine. You have to tell it who you are. You put the card in. Then you have to verify who you are by giving a PIN number. Once you're inside, all that stuff is encrypted. We don't have to worry about it. Once you're inside, you can only do so many things. You know, if the bank says you're only allowed to take $100 a day, you can't take $200 a day. Or there's some kind of policy that says, you know what, if you only have $50 in your bank account, you can't take $100. So those are all part of this information and this integrity. And so a lot of stuff, looking forward to a lot of discussions and other videos and forums and stuff like that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. And with that being said, let's go out and learn something.